never changes.
But Fallout certainly does. Welcome to a month-long retrospective of the entire Fallout series, or the bits of the Fallout series that are old enough for people to maybe have forgotten what they were all about, plus Fallout 3. We will go through them one by one and see the majesty that used to be Fallout. And I'm not making this show now because it's the fall and it's called Fallout, and it would be a very funny pun, but also because of this. For you see, in the last couple of months, Larian Studios made a poll, a study if you will, a market study to determine exactly how well versed in RPGs are the people that are playing their games. And this slide is just astonishingly frightening. People have not played the first two Fallout games. People have not played some of the greatest RPGs ever made, and Wasteland 2. They've not played Shadowrun Returns, which, okay, the first one was not that great, but the rest of them, Hong Kong, Dragonfall, amazing games. So many people have not played them. It's a crime. So that's why I'm making this show about the Fallout series. Whereas our good friend Steven Nonsense is going to make a series about Shadowrun on his channel, so go check that out as well. Fallout began a long time ago. It began with a man called Tim Kaine, a man hired by Interplay to work on the Bard's Tale construction set, a man who wanted to develop RPGs, a man who had played games like Wasteland, which was also developed by Interplay back in the day, and wanted to make something to surpass that. So naturally, Interplay made him work on a business simulator, which wasn't really a good fit for him, since he had no idea how to do business. He would later go on to say that that was also the reason why Troika failed. But eventually he did start building a game based on the GURPS system, because Interplay had a license for GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, which was made by Steve Jackson Games. Interplay actually wanted to get a hold of the Dungeons & Dragons license, but they thought that GURPS would not interfere with that, and it didn't. They did get the license for Dungeons & Dragons and proceeded to make games like Descent to Wonder Mountain, which you probably did not really hear much about because of good reasons. It wasn't very good. The initial version of Fallout was not called Fallout. It was called many other things. It wasn't even a post-apocalyptic game. It was a time-traveling adventure that featured the ability to travel through diverse ages throughout the world, throughout history, and was a bit too much to actually make. So the idea was dropped. The most important thing you have to understand about Fallout at this point is that it was built by Tim Kaine. He worked on it, building the engine, he worked on it, building the lore, building the story, building, well, everything about it, for almost a year. The only way he could actually get people from Interplay to work on the project was after hours. He would get designers, he would get artists, people like Leonard Boyarsky, who helped design the look and feel of the Fallout universe, along with Jason D. Anderson, and with the help of Chris Taylor. No, not the Total Annihilation guy, the other guy. The team grew eventually to a size of about 15 people, at which point Fallout was almost cancelled. It was still not called Fallout, though. It would be called Vault 13, or a post-apocalyptic adventure, or Wasteland GURPS Edition, though that too would not last for long. The game was not, as you may be able to discern, cancelled, because Brian Fargo saw that yeah, this thing actually had potential. I mean, it was sort of a game in the same vein as his older game, Wasteland, which was also a post-apocalyptic video game that's all about choices, exploring different ideas about humanity at the edge of their surviving capabilities after the world crumbled, after the bombs fell, after savages took over, and all that was left of humanity was ashes. And blood. Lots of violence. Legend goes that this is the reason why Steve Jackson pulled the license for GURPS from Fallout, because it was too violent. Not confirmable, but it didn't really do much to prevent the game from being released or delayed that much, on account of the whole rule set being isolated in its own little bubble that could easily be swapped out with something else. And thus was born the special system of statistics, of combat rules, and of the ever-popular groin shots. Fallout is one of those games in which marketing departments did not have that much faith. The idea of adding multiplayer to it coming around when Diablo 1 was released, and then being dropped. Fallout 1, a post-nuclear role-playing game, was released on the 30th of September 1997, a bit under 20 years ago. It was pretty much instantly very well received by the critics, which really sent the point home that Interplay should really put the maximum possible support behind the game, and they did, to the point where they actually wanted to have a sequel of it out as soon as humanly possible, which they did in just 1 year. And we'll talk about that sequel next week. So what's Fallout all about? Well, as I said before, this is about humanity beyond the end of the world. After the nuclear war left everything in ruins, a few lucky people managed to get inside giant vaults and were sealed away for decades, even centuries, hoping to one day open the doors to a world that is still suitable for human life. A world that can be rebuilt. But what some would find is a world filled with mutations, filled with people that could not hide from the radiation or change forever, filled with monstrosities, and filled with the evil of humans, the cruelty and the savagery that they were pushed to by desperation and by greed. Fallout takes a lot of inspiration from the ages of pulp fiction, from serials like Flash Gordon, from movies like Forbidden Planet in terms of aesthetics, in terms of general idea of what technology is. And it took ideas, it took themes from books like Canticles for Leibowitz, from movies like City of Lost Children, from which it got Ron Perlman as well as its narrator, from movies like Them, Mad Max, Boy and His Dog, and from things like I Am Legend, not the Will Smith one, of course. And added on top of that is a heavy dose of good old-fashioned fear-mongering from the Cold War, when people were told to duck and cover were they to see a nuclear blast because that will somehow save their lives. It is an anachronistic version of the future, a future envisioned in the 1950s, a future that has still cathode ray tubes in its computers, a future of which people still dream to be filled with nuclear-powered cars. This, without a doubt, has given Fallout one of the most striking aesthetics possible for this kind of setting. It's a future that doesn't belong there. It's a future that doesn't really make sense when you think about it, in terms of technology, that is. But it is a future, it is a setting that works superbly for this game. Visually, Fallout, I would say, still holds up, especially if you play it with the high resolution patch, which I did not on this video. That makes all the pixels smaller and zooms out a bit, so you see more of the screen. It also had very detailed talking heads for about 8 characters. They did not add more because making them took quite a long time since they were made out of clay and animated very slowly. It also sounded right. It sounded like it was from the post-apocalyptic age. Mark Morgan's music is pretty much spot on. It is so subtle in places that you don't even notice that it's actually music. You think of it of being the noise of this dead, radioactive world. It is such a contrast to modern games that use orchestras for everything. This used, gotta be honest, I had no idea what instruments for the most part it used, but they just sounded like they sounded like Fallout. And in this world you are sent as the inhabitant of a vault, someone who's never been outside in the cruel, radioactive, blighted world. Your mission is to somehow find a replacement water chip for your vault's water purification system. Otherwise, within 150 days, there will be no more water, and everyone will die. The initial version of the game did have a 150-day limit, and if you did not complete the game within that limit, you would lose, you'd have to restart, but the first patch removed the limit. The palpable tension of that ticker constantly counting down is extreme. It is, without a doubt, heart-wrenching, because Fallout is, at its core, a game about exploration. And when you have a massive world to travel through, where it can take 50 days to find just the first 4 settlements, it can be daunting for a new player. The fact that you were a newcomer to this wasteland was a really good way to get you to understand it as a player, because your character had reasons to not know anything about it. He or she lived in a can, because contrary to what the applause that the Fallout 4 reveal may have implied, Fallout always had playable female characters. You're playing essentially a blank slate, you're playing you, and the game's world was flexible enough to let you play as you, no matter who you were. If you were a good person that tried their best to help everybody they could, and maybe find a way to help their own people along the way, you could play as someone who would sure help others as long as it was profitable for them. Hey, who knows, maybe I don't even have to go back to the vault, or if I do I can just take it over or something. I'll run things the way I want to. Or you could even play as an absolute psychotic bastard that would just kill everybody they met. There was flexibility in the game's world, in the game's narrative, in the game's storyline, in the game's many different side quests that let you approach each situation the way you felt you could do it best. If you weren't good at combat, well, you could spend all your points into speaking, into speech, into intelligence, and try to talk people out of difficult situations. Sure, it wouldn't help if you had a gun on you and some armor to look mean, but with a good enough skill and talking to other people, you could intimidate the crap out of even raider bandit leaders, telling them that you are just part of something bigger and more vicious than they have seen in their entire lives. Naturally, they wouldn't go for it every time, but hey, that's what the reload function is for, or the combat system. Fallout's combat system may be a bit hard to get used to at first, on account of if you don't enable the option to change the animation speed, it may be a bit slow until everybody moves in their turn and shoots you in the face, or until every rat on the screen tries to kill you. The rats are probably the worst part of the game. They're not strong, they're not dangerous, they're just a lot of them, and killing them can just become a chore after a while. I would have much preferred if the rats were initially non-hostile like in Ultima Underworld, but at least there's not actually as many rats that you have to fight in Fallout 1 as there are in Fallout 2, where you have an entire side quest dedicated to just killing rats. A lot of them. There is a lot of rat-based combat in that game. But once you get over the rats and the animation speed, you'll find that this combat system is without doubt the best the series ever had. Well, no, the second best the series ever had. It is turn-based, it is tactical up to a point, it is heavily reliant on positioning, it is heavily reliant on you being able to decide from one moment to another, how will I approach the situation. I have a limited set of move actions, of action points. I have weapons that have different requirements. I have weapons that have different ranges, different damage outputs, and different chances to hit depending on what weapon I actually chose, what skill I have, and where the enemy is. If they're in complete darkness, well, I'm gonna have to light a flare and throw it at their feet so I can see them, but I may miss and hit something else and I won't be able to see them either. It appears simple, but it is quite complex, especially since it gives you the option, the incredibly satisfying option of aiming your shots to a certain body part. Arms, feet, center body, head, eyes, and the groin. Oh boy, those groin shots really made Fallout work. The game took inspiration from Wasteland and its descriptions, where if you would land a critical hit, you would sometimes get a description of that hit. You'd also see it graphically represented, wonderfully represented if you were to enable the Bloody Mess trait, which amped up the violence to ludicrously hilarious levels, where if you killed the rat, it would just explode like a watermelon, and the description would basically be that. It exploded like a watermelon. And if you hit someone in the groin, even though the animation would be them losing half their body in an explosion of guts and blood, it would say that they fell to the ground, clutching their crutch, yelling, "Mommy!" and then dropping dead. It was just hilarious. And all of these, like, there was reasons for you aiming for the eyes, aiming for the limbs. They had effects. Aiming for the eyes would sometimes blind people if you did not fire with a bowsar or a sniper rifle or something like that. If you did, it just killed them outright. it would cause massive damage. But if you shot them in an arm, they'd not be able to use that arm. They would have to drop the weapon they were holding. If you shot them in the leg, they couldn't move. You could knock them to the ground and then just beat them senselessly with your fists. You could even go unarmed. You could go fight in melee combat with everybody you could. Again, some of them had miniguns, so it may have been a bit more difficult at first until you got something like power armor, which made you look like a giant refrigerator. Though maybe not as much as the armor from Fallout 2, the Enclave armor. The combat was extremely satisfying also because there was also the notion of critical misses, not just critical hits. Yeah, you could critical hit someone and blow up their faces, but you could critical miss. You could lose your ammo, you could lose your gun, you could accidentally drop it, you could get a trait that made everybody around you more prone to critical misses, and you could accidentally hit an ally or a friendly NPC or a neutral NPC when trying to hit an enemy. It especially happened if you were trying to shoot someone with a very, very low chance to hit, or if you were using the burst fire mode on some of your weapons. Burst fire just meant that you would hit everything in sight in a certain cone. Your AI companions, which were sort of shoved in at the last minute and didn't have any proper code to be handled in a way that would be a bit more acceptable, would use burst fire at every chance they got and would kill you because they did not care. Fortunately, your most loyal companion, the dog called Dogmeat, could not handle an SMG and would just bite people and would run into protective force fields and die quite often. So it was important to not let the dog die, because this was not an immortal pooch like in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 and all the other ones. He was very perishable and only had 50 HP. Though to be fair, when you started out you had half that. And to end with the idea of combat, even when you were engaged in it, Fallout still tried its best to make it seem like there was a way out, because enemies had morale. Enemies, if they were low on life, if they saw you just utterly murdering everybody around them, they would try and flee. They would become sort of non-hostile towards you, though you could still target them, and the game would sometimes still treat them as a threat and not let you exit combat, but they would be mostly harmless to you, for a while at least, until they got back their composure and tried to attack you again. There were also many methods that you could use to try and avoid combat altogether. Not just the dialogue that I mentioned previously, but fiendish things like pickpocketing people and putting grenades, live grenades, in their pockets. But as I've said, this wasn't just a game about combat and killing stuff, it was a game about exploration. It was a game about discovering a world that is so wonderfully built, filled with interesting characters, filled with possibility, with opportunities to make choices, like actual, tangible, palpable choices that will shape the future of this world. Fallout 3 added the ability to basically know what the choices you made would do right after the quest ended, but in Fallout 1 you had to wait until the end, until you saw at that final cinematic the fate of everything that was touched by you. Whether they prospered thanks to your interference in their daily routine of spiraling towards oblivion, if you kill them all, or if something worse happened to them because of something you did. It was a world built upon mistrust. It was a world built upon wanting to keep what little you had left to yourself. Was there room in such a world for a hero? Well, you could find out. You could try and be one. Or in the end, you could perhaps join an army of semi-mindless, gigantic brutes crawling out from the deepest reaches of the desert on a crusade to wipe the slate clean, to bring an end to mankind and usher in the glory of a new species that is so far removed from human that you can't even tell that that's what they used to be. Fallout 1 is a game with some big ideas. Good storytelling, good dialogue. Maybe in some places the second one had better dialogue, more of it, more complex. There are things for a character to say, but as a starting off point, Fallout 1 was an amazing title. It was, truthfully, a game the likes of which we will rarely see these days. They were common back then, they were all too common, they were the norm. But things change, and sometimes not for the better. Unlike war, which they say never changes. If you're interested in picking up Fallout, you can find it right now on GOG for the low price of €8.50. That is a fantastic game that you will not regret playing. If your only experience with the the Fallout series is 3, New Vegas and 4, you are missing out on a deep, richly rewarding video game. Don't let the fact that your character cannot move up and down in a straight line dissuade you from playing this game. That's just a feature of the game. We call it the headless chicken walk. Goodbye.